People think that philosophy is very removed from the real world, right? That it has no application. It's just a bunch of people sitting around and, spinning wild tales and crazy ideas all day. And while in a sense that might be part of what is occurring, right? What he's really getting at the end here is that this view of philosophy, that is the view that it is useless, right? Just a bunch of people sitting around talking about crazy ideas, that this results partly from a wrong conception of the ends of life. That is partly from a wrong conception of the kind of goods which philosophy strives to achieve. So here's a perfect example of a phrase I have highlighted here, which we could misunderstand, right? So wrong conception of the ends of life. He's not talking here about the end of your life, right? He's not talking about like views of the afterlife. What he's saying is that when you find things like philosophy useless, that is because you have the wrong priorities, right? So the ends of life here, he's like talking about like a means to an end, your goals, the things that we're aiming for, right? And so if you value or prioritize the wrong things, right? If you're aiming for the wrong things in your life, of course you're not going to find philosophy valuable, right? So he's kind of setting up the idea that if you don't get what doing philosophy means, right? If you don't get why it's worthwhile, we might need to start off by looking at what are the things that you do find worthwhile, right? Are those even the places that you should be starting from? Okay, so if we are not then to fail in our endeavor to determine the value of philosophy, we must first free our minds from the prejudices of what are wrongly called practical people. Now, the original text, you can see I've edited it here, was what are wrongly called practical men. But again, right, when we have, I'm going to try to replace gendered language with its more contemporary gender neutral alternatives, right, whenever possible. But please note that when philosophers use men or man, they're often referring to everyone, right? They're just using it, they're using masculine language, right, in a way that is meant to generalize, but we might often mistake that to just be men, but they really were trying to refer to everyone. Now, the idea here is that, right, these practical people, typically in society, we find that to be a good thing, right? Practicality is something positive. We like when something has a practical application, right? It usually means that it's useful in some way. So he thinks that practical people have been titled so wrongly, right, that they have prejudices. So something that we typically think of as good, practical, he actually means in a very negative way, right? And so he's going to elaborate that on the next sentence. The practical person, as this word is often used, is one who recognizes only material needs, who realizes that people must have food for the body, but is oblivious of the necessity of providing food for the mind. So here he is delineating between two types of goods or ends, right? Types of things that people might strive for. We have goods of the body and goods of the mind, right? And so he's saying that practical people are concerned with goods of the body, but do not see any need for goods of the mind, right? And so you can probably see where this is going, right? Philosophy as an abstract concept is going to be a good of the mind, right? Not a good of the body, at least under this common misconception, right? And so if people don't see it as a good of the body, then they're not going to value it at all, right? In other words, this is him criticizing materialism, right? The idea that people are only concerned with stuff, right? Having all the stuff that they can get. Why do you want to get a college degree? So that you can get a good job. Why do you want a good job? So that you can make lots of money. Why do you need lots of money? So you can buy lots of stuff, right? And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the deceased late comedian George Carlin, but he has a wonderful stand-up video on this stuff. If you are bored in this COVID-19 crisis and need something to go watch, right, please entertain yourself with that, right? But the basic idea is that we can't even having a house full of stuff around us is often not enough. People have storage units full of stuff, right? And the idea is that when you look back on your life, right, if we can imagine the end of our lives, do you think you're going to be looking back and regretting or wondering about or even thinking about all the stuff that you had, right? Oh, I'm so glad I got that thing, or, that latest iPhone. And, oh, I'm so bummed I didn't have a chance to get that one other thing. I think most people realize that stuff in the end doesn't ever really matter, but it seems to be the thing that everyone is encouraged to strive for, right? And so this is one of those basic, ordinary beliefs that a philosopher is trying to get us to question, right? Well, why should that be the primary end, right? Why do I need to aim for the big house with the big car, right? Maybe something different, right? Maybe other things will make my life more valuable, right? So he gives us a little thought experiment next. If all people were well off, right? If poverty and disease had been reduced to their lowest possible point, there would still remain much to be done to produce a valuable society, right? I think most people would agree with that, right? Just having your basic bodily needs met is not sufficient. And even in the existing world, where we don't have enough, even for most people, right? The goods of the mind, he says, are at least as important as the goods of the body. So let me make this clear. If any of you have taken a psychology class, maybe, or you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, which says that we need to address the goods of the body, right, the basic elements of survival, before we can address other aspects of health, right, and flourishing, right, like mental health and emotional health. And so the idea here is that Russell is not saying that, the goods of the mind are more important than the body, right?